Okay, we are live with Dr. Debbie Dahl. Dr. Dahl, thank you so much for making the time. I appreciate it. You have many things to do, and you chose to spend an hour with me, so I do appreciate it. Um, so I think we can start with the sort of a full disclosure, right? Statement, which is the following: that you were my first boss way back in the day. When I transitioned from grad school to the world where people do things and create things, right? Now, the interesting thing is that my first job was sort of a nice transition from where I was, which was graduate school doing research, because the group that I joined was mainly research. It felt like a lot of research, right? A lot of interesting things we were doing. So maybe you can start with that. Describe that world like what we did back in Unisys in the 90s for the folks who are now entering into this space and were not born yet.
Well, actually, I think will be kind of fun to talk about the precursor to our group at Unisys,
Mhm.
which was a real research group, and we were funded by DARPA, and we were supposed to be doing things that would be useful to the military, but we were doing basic natural language understanding. Once in a while, we had military documents to analyze. And that was really fun. That for me, that was my transition from grad school to industry, and it was great. It was really, really fun because I didn't like the pure academic atmosphere of grad school, and we were just working on interesting questions. I like to see applications of what I was doing, and if it was analyzing a military message, I didn't care. I just wanted to analyze something.
Yeah.
So it was very academic, and we got into some really interesting problems that still people aren't. There's still challenges like pronoun reference resolution and inference that are still no one's been able to address those thoroughly. We certainly didn't solve anything, but I think we made some good progress. But the DARPA funding kind of died out in the early 90s. And so I said, well, this stuff is pretty practical. Let's start a commercial venture to try to commercialize it and do commercial industrial applications. So that's when we moved from the defense side to the commercial side of Unisys. And we had this wonderful opportunity to hire whoever we needed. And we got some unbelievable talent, including Ahmed, to help work on our projects. And then this was about, I guess, we started about 1995. And we thought, working with the marketing people, the commercial marketing people at Unisys, who I never worked with commercial marketing people before, but they were able to really zero in on what turned out to be a great application, which was call centers, automating call centers. And we built some great applications for some banks, which are still the kind of applications you see. Unfortunately, speech recognition wasn't what it has turned out to be, and it was really difficult to get the systems to be as reliable as they needed to be. But it was really, really exciting. We could just push forward and do things, and we were inventing new things every day. And
no, I do remember the excitement level. Also, it sort of coincided with the internet, the web emerging. So all of that was was exciting, I think. And what's interesting also is that as the internet and the web were emerging and people were starting to take the deployment of websites seriously, at some point, I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was like this rumor, right, in the street that, hey, because of the web, we're not going to need these voice automation systems, right?
Yeah, yeah.
When what happened really is the total opposite, right? It's because people before couldn't figure out how to get the phone number. Now they go to the website, they find it, and they call. And so that's I always give that as an example of where people don't understand fully the complexity of of the ecosystem of technologies, and they make these predictions that almost always turn out to be wrong.
I still have a magazine. I think it was actually Speech Technology magazine from 1996, with a big interview with Unisys executives about the internet. And they said, well, no one will ever. I mean, you go to the internet and look up information. You'll never, ever do transactions. That
On
is,
the
you'll never buy anything or do anything transactional. That's
Yeah.
impossible. It's just not safe.
It's not
Which
safe.
you
Yes.
can argue maybe it isn't safe, but
No, I mean, I think that's. I
didn't
think
stop people.
no, I mean, I keep making that mistake. Like I remember when I heard about eBay. Like, what? No,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna get defrauded. Somebody, or like even like relatively recently about Uber, right? What? Not a taxi, just a guy, a person who's gonna come and take. Yeah, well, no.
Yeah.
Well, at least for young ladies, they should not use. But of course, I was totally wrong. Not only Uber, but lots and lots of other companies emerged, and then of course, I make this mistake again with Airbnb. Like, I'm not gonna
Mhm.
go. How is this model gonna work? People are gonna like have their houses. How, right? So
Yeah.
hopefully, I've learned. I don't know.
I made so many technical predictions that were wrong. Like when Google started, I said, we have Alta Vista.
Yeah.
Why do we need another search engine?
Exactly. And also that search engine seemed simple, like there's only text box. Alta Vista has the other
Right.
things, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
There is I mean there is a lot more to the story than we think. I mean, hopefully, I don't know, maybe do you think that we have become a little bit more sophisticated now because there's always new technology, right? At least I've become more modest in terms of being vocal about my statement, like, no, this is not going to happen, or I don't say that anymore. But what do you think?
well, I agree with you. I don't make predictions anymore, but back in the back of my mind, I think, well, that's a stupid idea. Like
Give me one.
I'm still not sure about Clubhouse. Uh, it had a big burgeoning of Clubhouse activities, and I don't see them so much anymore.
Yeah.
But we'll
Well,
see.
what's happening is it's very quickly becoming um, becoming ubiquitous. Like, for example, now in Twitter, there's Twitter Spaces, and Facebook, there's that, and I see like some other apps. So, and these apps are being used. People are actually doing that. The Clubhouse is not the only one. So, like, for example, I used to go to Clubhouse all the time. Now I spend my time instead of Clubhouse in other social audio platforms, right? So I think it's something that's here to stay, um, because the pudding is there. People are actually using it, right? A lot of people like to talk. So
Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of an interesting, broader. That's a question that has a broader applicability. Is that you are not a typical person. No one is a typical person, and so it's so easy to say if something doesn't appeal to me as an individual, that it appeals to nobody, and
that's
you got to get that mindset out of your mind, especially if you're designing conversational systems, that you are not the typical user, your boss is not the typical user, and certainly your executives are not the typical user. So it's the hardest thing ever to convince people that you have to be data driven about how applications are going to be appealing.
Yeah. I mean, we saw what happened with what is that? The Fire Phone with Jeff Bezos. He drove that to the ground because he drove that, and then he learned
Oh
from that.
yeah.
He was so in charge of that thing, and he even like he was with the designers and everything. And what happened is, because of the way Amazon works, is there's the god and there's the demigods and there's the quarter gods, right? And it's very hard for anybody to say no to the upper. So nobody
Right.
everybody was they were behind the scenes saying this is a piece of crap, but nobody told him. But I think he learned his lesson there, because after that, I think he the echo, he sort of kept his distance, because he knew he didn't know, and it was just a spectacular fire. So I think for me that's an example of where where people like executives, they just don't know. They don't know what to do or what works and what doesn't work. They live in the bubble.
And they're used to being right all the time and not being disagreed with.
Right. Exactly. So let me ask you this, because I never, maybe I knew once and then I forgot. What did pundit stand for?
Oh, prologue, understanding of integrated text.
What is the first word?
Prologue.
Oh yeah, prologue.
Good old prologue. Yeah.
Good old prologue. The best language ever invented, in my opinion.
It's still around. It's still around.
Still around? People still use it? Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I used it a couple of years ago for a project I was doing at NASA. And the job was aircraft navigation. So we thought, I was not doing that part. I was doing the natural language understanding, but my system was generating prologue as input to the navigation system. So it was a very nice language for logical, you're told to go up, you go up, and if you're told to go down, you go down. And we did some pretty interesting prologue demos, but I never thought that would come back and be useful, but it was. It's been about a good 20 years since I used prologue.
Yeah. No, it's how would you describe prologue to somebody who has never used prologue? Like they've used C and C#, and how is it different in your own words?
Well, it's super declarative.
Yeah.
And so it's more like HTML. It's very declarative. So you just say what you want to happen, and the inbuilt algorithms have a search strategy. They try to find an answer for you. It's a nice natural language understanding is a nice application, because you're, confronted with a sentence and you try to find an analysis of it.
Yeah.
But that is a very hard mindset to get into when you're used to writing in a procedural language. You say, okay, now do this, now do that, now do that. In terms of prologue, you state your goals and it figures out what to do. And it takes a while to get acclimated to that kind of thinking.
Yeah. I remember, I coded for years and years in prologue, and whenever I needed to code in procedural, I felt like my IQ would go down, right? Because you have to declare everything, and you have to say, do this and this. Come on, man. And all those things, there's no declaration of variables. It's just basically a rule with sub-rules. Okay, this rule will be fired if all its sub-rules are fired, and each one of those sub-rules is a sub-rule. And then you can recurse and all of that. And so you can just focus on the problem instead of all these stupid things about this is of this type, and this variable is of this type, and this array has to have 100 of these, and I have to, I forgot the semicolon here, and oh my gosh.
Well, prologue will get mad at you if you forget that punctuation.
That's true, but it's very, the punctuation, the structure, the syntax is very straightforward, right? You just have parentheses, and you have commas, and you have semicolons, I think. Is that it? Is there anything else? And words?
Brackets,
right? Brackets, right? But you're not like, I'm going to declare these variables, and I'm going to initialize them to this, and I'm going to do this loop, and loops. Come on. The loop is part of the prologue out of the box, which I love.
Yeah.
So it's totally different language, and I love that. I think I can easily program with it still if I wanted to, just because it's it's basically it's prepositional, so it's just predicates, logical, right? Prepositions, and you're just declaring things, and then you have to structure the problem in a different way. You have to think about a problem in a different way. You have to structure it in your head. So which brings us to, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say recursion is your primary tool for
Yep.
doing operations, and that takes a little bit of thinking to get your mind into that
Yeah.
recursive
Yeah.
mindset.
Yeah, but it's so efficient. Like once you get that, and I had a lot of because I did Prolog in my undergrad, my grad, right? All of my projects were in Prolog, and so I had a lot of friends in computer science who were not into Prolog, and they tried to learn it and they just could not. Like there's no way.
Really?
Yeah, they couldn't do it because they're still thinking about, what are my variables and how do I set them? And like, come on, don't think about the variables. Think about the goals. All right.
Well, that's very interesting, because when I learned Prolog, most of the other, we were just getting started in the research center.
Yeah.
And most of the people that I was working with were actually linguists by background. They didn't have they hadn't been, work programming for years and years in a procedural language.
Right. So I'm sure they picked it up naturally.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Yeah. Because they didn't have these prejudices and, and biases and all that. So while we're at this topic, so today there's natural language processing. There's a lot of stuff out there that people are using out of the box and so forth. If you were to describe in a nutshell the difference between the systems that we were working on and the current ones, how would you characterize that, like in a nutshell? What do you think?
Well, I think the kind of current state-of-the-art mindset is try to stay away from having any domain knowledge, or not domains like retail or insurance, not those kind of domains, but knowledge of language.
Mm-hmm.
If you could figure out ways to get kind of a simulation of understanding from looking at very large patterns, very large data sets, that's a good goal. So we have, things like BERT and the very newer types of approaches with an unbelievable amounts of data. You don't have to know anything about language. As a undergraduate, you just plop some data into the libraries and churn it, and out comes some answers. But I have been noticing that some of the knowledge of language is kind of creeping back in a little bit. So you say, well, we want to do this just completely machine learned system, but maybe we should be stemming our inputs and doing some morphological analysis, so we don't have, 6 different ways of saying the same verb with the different tenses and stuff. So it's just kind of, maybe we could make our training process a little bit more efficient if we could do some pre-processing. But that's not natural language based. That's just some pre-processing. So I don't know. It seems to work pretty well for what you're trying to do with it. I think it's probably cutting off some potential answers that don't lend themselves to that approach.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I see it, for example, in Gmail, right? When I'm typing my email, right? I mean, there are patterns that are totally legit, right? So it's perfectly okay to say something like, I do want you to come to the party, right? And then, but the thing just puts a little blue under the do. Because it hasn't seen enough of I do want you to, right? It has seen a lot more I want you to. And so it says, maybe this may be a mistake. So it doesn't really know until enough people use it. But the thing is, there are a lot of subtle things in language that are not used often. And they are subtle because they're not used often. They are used only in special circumstances. And so you don't have them in the corpus that you're training with, right? And so the bias is for sort of less subtle language, right? And I'm just trying to think about someone who is writing English that's not their primary language, and so they rely heavily on the Google thing because it tells them how to write. Uh, and so if they want to be creative with some way of saying something that might be totally legit, they're like, no, 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 can't do that. Go back to the normal, right? So, what do you think about that? The fact that the software now is sort of normalizing the way we write, you know?
Yeah, you
This,
have to
yeah,
fight it to say something different. Say, no, I
yeah,
really do mean do here.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's kind of a related thing that it's not. Well, I'll just tell you what it is. It's an activity that I've been involved in for a few months called the Digital Assistant Throwdown.
Mm-hmm.
And the project is we have a monthly call, and we try to break local digital assistants by giving them just a little bit difficult of a job. We're not trying to be convoluted
Mm-hmm.
or you say something that they've never heard before, but just try something like I want to find a nearby Asian restaurant except not Japanese, and
Yeah.
that not Japanese business sends it right down the tubes.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's the problem with that is, of course, it hasn't seen that training data, but it also, I think there's an unbelievable amount of back behind the scenes stuff with interns and people in India getting things that don't work with those assistants, and that's
Yeah.
and it's incredibly handcrafted, but they would never tell you that because that doesn't sound very cool if they're trying to enumerate all the sentences of a language
Yeah.
with busy interns.
Yeah. Yeah. Data science is it's like sausage, right? Right. You don't want to see it being made. There's a lot of stuff
Yeah,
that's like that.
yeah.
That's
You have
when
to,
when Amazon folks say that they have like 30,000 people working on Alexa, like a good chunk of them, right, are those
yeah.
folks who are manually feeding the beast. You were going to say something. I'm sorry.
Um, oh, I was just going to say, how about data cleaning? The first step in all machine learning projects is
Yeah.
taking out anything that might interfere with your training, like I
Yeah.
don't know, tables, some kind of HTML markup, something that it can't deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot of manual work that happens. It's like it reminds me of crypto, right? Or the cloud. Right. So the
Oh
cloud.
yeah,
Okay. Say,
oh
oh, the
yeah,
cloud. The cloud is like you have people have the notion of the cloud is, is saving the environment because you don't need because everything is up there, right? Up there, but
yeah, yeah,
right. But what up there is really is like these farms and farms and farms of servers of hardware, right?
yeah.
That occupy land and that occupy resources and electricity and so forth. So the cloud is very expensive. Same thing with crypto, right? Crypto is very expensive to create all that, all mining and all. But there's this notion, it feels to me, that we're getting more and more virtual, right, as opposed to physical, which in fact
Hmm.
is
Yeah,
not
I
true.
think that's probably
Yeah,
true.
yeah, that there's a lot of hardware behind the scenes. Yeah. So, if we were to say in a nutshell, the difference between what we were doing back then and today is we were trying to make use of, say, devices like syntax, right?
Right.
And semantics, definitions. And so when a sentence comes in, and then pragmatics, how people talk, right? So when something comes in, it would be maybe you can describe the difference in that sense. Like walk us through what somebody saying, I want to go from New York to Denver. How would that be processed now versus then versus now?
That's a good question. So what we would do, we would have what they actually still have, a pipeline. Um, First, you look up all the words in the dictionary, and if there's any words that have endings, take the endings off and turn that into like go plus past tense.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would have a syntactic parse that would say, I am the subject. Want is the main verb. Go is an auxiliary verb. And there's 2 prepositional phrases from Dallas to Denver that are associated with go. And then we would end up with some semantic analysis that turns the from and to into some meaningful thing like source and destination.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it was in context, are there any pronouns, we'd figure out what the pronouns refer to in the previous discourse. And then we ended up with something that was actually very similar to what you end up with in a, something like the Alexa Skills Kit, a frame with an intent and entities. We didn't call them that, but that's pretty much what they were. And then in our old system, that would be an input to a reasoning process with prologue rules that would do whatever kind of reasoning you needed to do to solve your application. Now, if you look at something like a specific application, not the research on machine learning, but you would be trying to do the same thing. You would be trying to turn that into an intent with entities, but you would do that based on the user, the developer, giving you hundreds and hundreds of, giving the system hundreds and hundreds of examples and say, okay, well, Denver can be a good destination, and Houston can be a good source or origin or whatever you want to call it. So once you get to the point where you're going to do something practical, where you interface the language understanding with the world, then your goal is not that different. But the processing that has to go before that is, I think it was originally, well, today it's designed so that the developers don't need that much knowledge or training.
Mm-hmm.
But in the the 90s and late 80s, you had to know what a noun was. You had to, and now they don't. They try to abstract away from that information.
Yeah.
And that's where you get these wacko chatbots that fall apart if you ask them anything that wasn't the most obvious, 1% of all the utterances that they could get.
Yeah. And so just so that we can maybe help the folks understand the pluses and minuses, right, of the let's call it the structured way, the semantics, syntax, semantics, pragmatics, and all. If somebody were to say, I want to go from New York to, I think I want to go to Denver, right? Let's say that's exactly what they said. How would that be handled? What kind of cleanup would need to be done within that first paradigm that you described?
Yeah, we would parse that whole thing, and we would get two sentences, and they would have 2 analyses, and then somebody would write some rules, some dialogue rules to say, well, this user corrected themselves. The thing about that approach was it was for some things it did a great job in thinking about the hard cases, but it all depended on somebody thinking about the hard cases, and the more. So you would have to say, oh, gee, what would happen if somebody said something like that? But now maybe you get that data. And the thing that is really important about machine learning is you don't have to depend on some highly trained person to think of all the things that somebody might say. You have data and you can deal with what really happens. And yeah. I think that was actually one of the things that led to around 1990, when DARPA decided that speech and natural language had something to do with each other. The program manager said, well, what we had 100 examples of military messages, and the 101st one didn't work because nobody thought about how it'd be processed. But now we say, okay, we need a 1,000,000-word corpus. And it's not going to cover everything, but it's going to cover a lot of things that you wouldn't have thought of as an individual developer. So that was a big mind shift that was made a lot of what we have now possible.
Yeah, you mean the move to data?
Yeah.
Yeah, the move to data, right? And so today, just so that we can walk the folks who are watching us and they had never thought about natural language, which is the primary audience, natural language processing, right? Okay, so you have a way of doing extraction of meaning and intent and all that that is informed by syntactic rules and semantic rules and all that. Then you have today's world where it's mainly lots and lots and lots of examples that are then classified and basically trained, right? There's training that happens with lots of human beings behind the scenes doing the tagging and so forth, right? So that in the new paradigm, if somebody said what I said before, right? And what I said, meaning I want to go with that and all that, and that was not exactly. I mean, there's no exact match to that, right? With the current data driven, how would that be handled in that case, right? Even though it's not an exact match, how would it be? I don't think that would trip it necessarily if it has enough data. What do you think?
I think, yeah, that's a good question. So what if you get something that's where someone's correcting themselves?
Yeah.
They probably, in my experience, just ignore the half the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
They've got something, got a hold of something that they can understand, and then they ignore the rest.
Yeah.
I don't think they have to do that. I think they should be looking at things like unanalyzed parts of the sentence. So they have 20 words and they've only used 10 of them. Something's wrong. Don't just mouth off with what you did understand.
Yeah.
That's something ignoring that people do all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They don't understand everything you said, so they ignore the part they didn't understand.
Yeah. Yeah, I think whatever somebody says, there's information there at multiple levels, right? Could be hesitation, could be that they have a speech impediment, could be that they don't know exactly what they want, or they know exactly what they want, but they don't know what the words are. And so that information,
They change their mind.
Or change their mind. Exactly, change their mind in mid sentence, which we do, right? I'm gonna have a large I'm gonna get a small hoagie. Remember, I'm dieting, right? So which one is it, the large one or the small one? And then the interesting thing is, let me talk to you about like one of my favorite topics, and then we'll talk about one of your favorite topics. We'll make mine short.
Okay.
which is this. I think one of the biggest hurdles today that's coming in the way of broader and greater adoption of, say, these assistants is how they manage turn taking, right? When they don't know when you're done talking, they use things like silence, and they don't interpret hesitation. If I'm pausing, which is where I think in that case, I think syntax could come in, right? Okay, they are saying something and they're hesitating and they're not done, right? Because they haven't formulated anything that's that makes sense, and so let them talk, right? So what do you think about that problem, right? The problem of, let's call it conversational turn and pointing.
Yeah, that is a really interesting problem, and I think that it's very like you're recommending, I think, a really good heuristic that if you've heard a complete utterance, you should be able to, after a couple hundred milliseconds, the chatbot or whatever it is should be able to say, okay, they're done talking.
Yeah.
But I think with humans, it's very, very fine grained. And 500 milliseconds is probably fine. 600 milliseconds, and then the person you're talking to starts wondering what's going on. I'm kind of making up these times, but they're very fine grained. And so I think that's a good point, that maybe if you did some analysis on the utterance and you had a complete utterance, you could say, okay, they're probably done. But if there's an incomplete utterance, maybe you want to give them a little bit of time to finish their utterance, but you don't want to just leave them hanging.
Yeah.
Have you used Siri lately? Oh my God, it's doing something so horrible.
Of course, it went step back. It's special. It knows how to go a step back. Go ahead, tell me.
Okay. Hey Siri. If you address it and don't say something right away, it says which it always interrupts me, because I'm taking a second to decide what I want to ask it. But some genius at Apple thought that would be user friendly, and it's terrible.
Okay, we got to make some noise about that.
It's fairly recent that it started doing that.
I wonder. So does it, when it says it takes the turn, it's not listening anymore?
It's listening.
It's listening, and it still says, okay, it's
Sorry about that.
Should we pause here? Is that the person?
No, it's okay.
Okay. So it says, I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna try it now. Hey Siri. I don't have the volume up. Hey Siri. Oops. No, forget about it. My iPhone is misbehaving. But no, I mean, that's interesting, right? Why would they do that? I mean, let's think about it. Like, I'm sure they're rational. Why would they do that? What's the place there?
I think they think you're doing maybe eyes free, and you want to make sure it's listening. So that's true. It does confirm that it's listening, but maybe there's something about the timing. It's a little bit too quick, but every single time it interrupts me.
Well, I mean, if it said yes, hey Siri, yes, as opposed to because they say like what? Because I would. What do you think?
Hey Siri. Just
That's better, right?
Well,
the first one is like,
yeah, that's a little bit rude.
Yeah,
I don't know, but the timing is bad for me.
I mean, what problem are they solving there? Is it the problem that somebody doesn't think that it's listening to them? Is that probably, you think they're trying to solve that problem?
I think maybe that's the only possible explanation. And then if you're not looking at your phone, if you are looking at your phone, then it has a little icon.
Yeah.
But if you're not, then maybe people were worried that it wasn't listening.
I mean, a beep would be just fine, right?
Yeah. Well, I think
if it did beep, like it's done, like beep. Okay, it's listening. I think maybe I think the false trigger. Maybe they're trying to deal with false trigger. Sometimes I say something and what is it talking to me? Okay, as opposed to it's triggers and it's listening, and then it comes back with an answer. Like, what the hell is that? Right? Maybe.
Yeah, it does a pretty good job of not falsely triggering itself. I don't know.
I think it's learning.
Well, they're trying to solve a problem, probably, but there are also a lot of amateur psychologists in the world who think that's a polite response to being addressed.
Which brings us to a nice transition to I think one of your favorite topics, which is these voice bots, right? Should they, what kind of relationship should we have with them, right? Is it a type of friendship? Is it a type of assistance? And I'm still thinking about it. I don't know what the nature of it is. In my opinion, it's something completely different than anything else. But what do you think?